Good evening, Animafest. Hi, I'm Cort, your moderator. PRISM Comics and ASIFA-HOLLYWOOD are really excited to bring this panel to you featuring some of the best LGBTQ plus creators in the animation business, people that I really admire. We're going to talk to you today about maintaining authenticity and queer representation in animation, about how we've made connections and about the idea of making connections in a way that helps empower your creativity and empower your voice in terms of representation and fighting that community with the animation industry. So this is really a conversation for you to think about how you can find your voice or support yourself as a queer creator or support queer creators and find that authentic voice as well. First, we're going to introduce our panelists. Again, I said my name, Cort Lane. I'll be your moderator today. I've been producing animation for 2 decades for Barbie, Marvel, Disney. Right now I'm with E1 making My Little Pony for Netflix, as well as some other shows. One of the things I'm really proud of is serving on GLAAD's Kids and Family Advisory Council. GLAAD is an American-based advocacy organization that really pushes for queer representation in all media. GLAAD stands for the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. And very proud to serve on that council with Rebecca Sugar, who's here today, and Taneka Stotts. And also had the pleasure of executive producing a documentary called No Straight Lines, which is a wonderful film, won the Outfest Jury Prize this past year. And it's about queer comics and groundbreaking creators who are queer comic creators. And so, since we're talking about connections and community, each of us is going to introduce how we're connected to some of the other people on the panel. And I'll start with Taneka, since I talked about her just now.
Hello, everybody. I'm Taneka Stotts, currently the story editor on Pinecone and Pony, but my start in animation came thanks to Rebecca Sugar for allowing me to write on Steven Universe Future. Not only that, but I'm also connected to Alonso, who is the director. And I also know by proxy Sam King, because we all work in the same industry. So it's really wonderful. We're all a small world and it's really great. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back.
Now, Rebecca.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Sugar. I created Steven Universe, and before that I was a writer and a storyboard artist and a songwriter on the show Adventure Time. And I was lucky enough to work with Taneka and Alonso on Steven Universe, especially Steven Universe Future. And I've also been lucky enough to become a member of the GLAAD Kids and Family Council with Cort and with Taneka. That's been before that I came from sort of underground comics. So I also have a big fondness for the work that's been done in that particular space, and also how it's gotten a chance to sort of bloom over in the animation community. It's been really exciting to see. And then I'll throw it to Alonso.
Oh, hi, my name is Alonso Ramirez Ramos. I'm an executive producer in a show in development. I'm working with Sam King, who is directing part of our project, and we went to school together, and so this is a wonderful room, by the way. I'm just so happy to be here. Just a little bit about me. I came from Mexico 17 years ago to study and work in animation. I moved to Burbank, right next to Cartoon Network. And I was like, I'm gonna work there one day, like a block away. And I did. I had the fortune to work on Steven Universe with Rebecca and Taneka. And I am so happy to be here. Thank you for having me. And I'll pass it to Sam.
Yeah, hi. My name is Sam King. I'm a storyboard artist and director. I worked on some stuff at Cartoon Network, Clarence, and then I've most recently been at Disney on DuckTales and The Ghost of Molly McGee, and now working with Alonso on his great project. And overall, I'm just inspired by everybody in this panel. So that's my main connection, is that I love everybody here. So, I'm super excited to be here today.
Yeah, I think it's I think one thing that's clear is we have so much respect for each other and we admire each other's work. I've been binging Pinecone and Pony from Taneka just in the last couple of days. Lovely show. Rebecca, I've been in awe of forever. So, you know, one of the things that's happened in the industry over the last 5 years, and it's specifically a window of 5 years, and I want to talk a little bit about the why of that, is that LGBTQ plus representation in animation for kids has increased exponentially in a short window of time. And I'd like all of our panelists to talk about that, their experience with that or their thoughts on why that is. One of them, I think, is the community that we're seeing right here and how we've hired other queer creators or encouraged them or mentored them and supported the same sort of vision and work. But also GLAAD and its Kids and Family Advisory Council, I believe, has been really valuable in that change. GLAAD made the decision 5 years ago to create a Kids and Family Advisory Council because they recognized that LGBTQ plus representation in kids television was lagging way behind the rest of the media landscape. So when we formed the council, and Rebecca joined me in forming that council that time, we created an award, we created advocacy, resources for studios and networks. And in doing so, we saw the industry level up. So they needed that encouragement. And there was a bit of a carrot and stick, embarrassing studios and networks who were not doing well enough, talking to them, providing resources and council members to advise them, but also in creating the award. That first year we found we could barely cobble together 5 nominees. Cut to recently, we have 2 categories because it just grew so big, younger kids and older kids, and trying to whittle down to 10 nominees in each category proved quite difficult. So that's a big shift. And I'd like everybody to talk about their experience or their awareness of that. And because Rebecca has been an award-winning creator in that space, I'd like to start with you, Rebecca.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I was really starting to try to do this kind of work 11 or 12 years ago in the early 2010s when I came out here to work on Adventure Time. And at that time, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was still a national policy. Same-sex marriage wouldn't be sort of legal for another 5 years. And the atmosphere around doing something like this was that it was an extremely subversive thing to include in a cartoon that was directed at younger kids. And we were working on Adventure Time. They had brought in a lot of people from, as I mentioned, from independent comics, which was a really special thing about that particular show. And so a lot of us were very accustomed to doing exactly what we wanted with no compromises at all. You know, we were making our personal work and we were putting it out. And so we were trying our best to stay, and we were really encouraged by Pendleton Ward. And in my case, I was storyboard partners with Adam Mudo, who's gone on to take over that, running that show. We were really encouraged to not hold back and to put 100% of ourselves into that particular show. So at the time, we were doing some episodes with Marceline and Bubblegum, and I understood that we couldn't show them actively in a relationship, but I thought, well, could we imply that they had been in one previously, and that the fallout of that is sort of extending into the present? And I really needed some sort of, I was writing a lot of songs for them for an episode called What Was Missing, and I needed some sort of hook into their emotional chemistry. And they had one very brief interaction that was written by Tom Herpick, where there seemed to be some sort of tension there. So I ran this idea by my storyboard partner and the crew internally, and everyone was really interested in it. And then ultimately, when that work started getting out there, this was probably 2011, I think. Audiences really understood that was what was going on. But then there was a lot of backlash from the network, and we were told, we could not speak about the nature of their relationship. We couldn't be putting this into the show. We were called into a very tense meeting where they said, don't you understand you work for a company? It was like it was not considered okay at that time. And, but on the flip side, seeing the response to it was so incredible, especially towards Marceline. I was having the opportunity to put a lot of myself into Marceline, and the fact that people understood that the character was bisexual was really moving to me as at the time, very closeted bisexual person. And so it was really blowing my mind. So it was both a very negative and a very positive experience. And it really lit this fire in me to do more and to try and find ways to show characters that actually were in an active relationship. So as we were developing Stephen, it was sort of we were navigating, how do we get this out there? How do we make it so clear and so evident, but still make it possible to get this work out there? But part of the situation with that level of sort of censorship at the time was that it was impossible to connect with other artists. And I was not supposed to talk about what we were doing. I was not supposed to be doing what we were doing. And so I had no idea there were other people in the industry that were really hoping that this work could be possible. And so it wasn't until 5, 6, maybe even 7 years later that I was able to sort of say what I was doing and why, and start to connect with other people like Cort and Chris Nee, who was also really championing this work. And then also other people from other worlds, from comics, or even just members of the LGBTQIA community, activist community, who could see that we were doing this and were contacting me. And I was sort of paralyzed because I was not allowed to sort of publicly interact with any of those spaces as well. So I think part of the change, just the power of the activism of the changes that have been able to happen because of activists outside of the entertainment industry, and also because of the overwhelming, they always assumed that there would be an incredibly, not even just completely, they thought that the response would be extremely negative to us doing this and did not expect that it would be so positive. The groundswell of public support for this work and the vocal love from fans has also made this incredible difference. And because it was impossible to get this work out there, it was impossible to demonstrate that there could be a positive response. And I think that that's made an unbelievable difference, in addition to the coordination from GLAAD to speak directly to executives. The creatives have wanted to do this forever, but the executive sphere really needed that, needs that guidance from people who speak that particular language too. And so I'm so grateful to GLAAD for sort of reaching out and coordinating that, and then grateful to audiences for being so vocal in their support, because that's made such a difference.
Yeah, one of the things that GLAAD does is advise studios and platforms and networks how to deal with and avoid and be proactive and push back against negative press from right-wing organizations, which seems like a weird thing, but it's actually critical to making them feel more comfortable. Taneka, can you speak to that topic a little bit? Because here you are as a story editor on a show that has wonderful queer representation.
Yeah, thank you. Also, as a Adventure Time super fan that Rebecca unknowingly allowed onto their show, I was also kind of just given this power to know that our audiences wanted queer content. And not only that, we were taking that message forward into the publishing sphere with comics. We produced Beyond the Queer Science Fiction and Fantasy Comic Anthology, which broke all of our records for our Kickstarters at the time and really propelled queerness as a genre. And not only that, but just as something that was acceptable within all fictional tellings, fantasy and non, and science fiction. So it was really fun to see. But that all came down to a head with, yes, unfortunately, there has been drawbacks to that publicity from far right and unfortunately very radicalized voices that would just want to continue to push back. Fortunately, we've been able to gather together and make resources through community-led projects and also through larger foundations being able to actually finally hear our voices and being able to take on the scope of what we are trying to put out there. I'd like to point out Steven Universe's Dove campaign as one of those very special campaigns that goes very far in not only pushing that body language and autonomy, but the understanding that we are here, we've been here, and maybe it's time to stop the bullying tactics because they're not working. And because our voices are growing louder, and because we are not afraid to be the individuals that we are, both on the screen with our characters and off the screen in person with our friends, family, and those we would like to mentor into the same positions. So yes, I see that we have been gaining ground in many places, and this is deeply to affect other states where kids are having their rights of reading certain material or watching certain things removed. It's very important to still have these languages out there. It's more than just an identity. It's also about your emotional connectivity to yourself and your journey. Having that denied can lead to very sad consequences. So these motions of animation finally being able to achieve the paramounts that they have in showing not just our relationships, but our connections is something that is deeply embittered into this industry. And I feel will only continue to grow louder as we're continue creating.
Yeah, thank you. Sam, some perspective from you?
Yeah, it's interesting because I came into the industry when, you know, the work that Rebecca had been doing on Adventure Time was like, I remember I actually had some of Rebecca's like, or actually, sorry, I think they were Natasha Allegri's like Marceline and bubblegum drawings in my cube. And I was still very closeted at the time. This was when I was in college and I didn't really understand why that connected with me. But when I got into the industry, the work had started, but we were still very much like in one of my very first jobs we had, and on Clarence, we were really lucky to have a character that was, or a character that had two moms, because they were able to say like, well, this is based on a real person who was raised by his two, you know, lesbian aunts. So we're reflecting real life there, which, you know, also goes into authentic storytelling, but that was like, this is how we're going to convince them to let us do this. But we still were also told like, you can't really talk about that online. You just kind of do that internally, but don't say that to anyone. And it was really interesting because Alonso and I were actually on an LGBT panel for my alma mater around the time I think it was like Steven Universe was out, and was in maybe like season 2 or 3. And it was so interesting because at the time we were supposed to bring like examples of what reflected us in media, and almost everyone maybe had an animation example possibly, but it was all live action, and especially live action from older shows, or not older shows, but shows meant for an older audience. And you know, and I remember us talking about like, this is what certain people are trying to do, like to get more of this in animation, and especially animation for kids, especially kids who need to know that this is okay, that this isn't just an adult topic, this is, you know, also them. And it's just amazing to see how far we have come from, okay, well, here are tactics that people are using to like kind of like sneakily get this in, versus now where I feel like I'm on shows where this is like a topic that you go in first day, say, hey, I'm interested in this. What characters are we planning on? What storylines are we looking at? And it's an open conversation from the very beginning. And that's just been an incredible arc to see since I've been in the industry.
Agreed. We're a couple minutes behind, so I'm going to move to the next question. And actually, your response, Sam, was a great segue. I'm going to have Alonso start off and telling any individual stories that our panel might have, and it could be good stories and or bad stories, about attempting to tell these stories, these narratives about LGBTQ plus characters. Alonso, any good or bad experiences you'd like to share?
No, I mean, what I find so interesting in this is sort of like how, you know, the what we're witnessing in the industry and the change really ties back to our personal journeys, and how, you know, ourselves have found our way and coming out. And, you know, I was just thinking how, you know, I've been in the industry for around 12 years, but I've only been out 9 years. So it's kind of like, there's definitely like, and coming in and just like, you give me flashbacks of like, oh, when we were having that panel, we were digging for influences that was like anime and all this, like, oh yeah, I remember seeing that one snippet, it was so cool, you know, but you know, and you know, you don't know why that resonates with you so much, but it's in you, you know, and as you make your way in your community, you start making those connections. You see that, you know, like people are feeling the same way. And it was just such an important thing for me at the time to be able to share who I was authentically. And at the time I was thinking it was just because it's because of the art. I wanted the art to be authentic and I wanted to be good. And you know, so I need to be honest, you know, and that got me out of the door. That got me like stepping in. But now, you know, I look back and I see like, I just have to be present for myself. I have to be present for my well-being first, you know, and that is sort of like the work that I'm doing right now. And in conjunctions of all the amazing things and creative things that we're doing. So, you know, and you know, being able to tell these stories, I mean, I was the biggest fan of Steven Universe, and like I was screaming the loudest at the Comic-Con, you know, and it's just the fact that like you can see that video, you can hear my voice, it's distinct, and just the fact that I was able to see, you know, be a part of that with Taneka and Rebecca. And just knowing that at the forefront of the great work is that human aspect, that sort of care for others and our community. That's what's been so inspiring. So that, I mean, I'm just so fortunate that that has been my story. That this is the window of time where I've been privy in the industry, and I feel that we're in a great moment, and there's great momentum moving forward. Yeah.
Taneka, any specific stories you can share, good or bad, on attempting to introduce these characters? Oh, you.
I muted myself. I did the Zoom panel no. All right. Hello, folks. Now you can hear me. So I'll just go ahead and say, I've actually had a bad experience and a great experience. And I'll start with the bad briefly. While I had continued to navigate animation after Steven Universe Future, I had a lot of meetings with DEIs and a lot of diversity inclusion specialists who wanted to talk to me, but they wanted to talk to me about how do we slip it in still, but don't say the words. And that was something that was bothering me. It was bothering me because I had already seen that the tide was completely turned and that they were kind of living on regressed information. So I kind of had to quickly update them that it was okay to have a Black male character that identified as gay and that it would be okay. They were like, we're not sure about that. And we're still pushing back on me. And then they finally went ahead and released it and found that they got a lot of good press. Not only that from it, but also just the amount of stories that came from it were so heartfelt and meaningful, especially because Black queer love is not something that you see on a screen, especially from our community. So it was really important not only to create that moment, but to watch it actually live its lifespan on the screen. That was kind of a bad situation though, because at the end of the day, the people who were responsible for that decision were so uncomfortable by that decision that they cut a few lines of dialogue and they continued to manipulate the character to the point where it was very much so a quick B-plot moment that lived for maybe 5 seconds on the screen. But still, that was enough of a win for me that it existed, that I did not mind. However, that is now roiled over into where I'm currently at, which is working for Apple Plus and First Generation Films with a production by DreamWorks. We created Pinecone and Pony based off Kate Beaton's very amazing children's book, The Princess and the Pony. From here, we had no objections whatsoever. In fact, we only had support. In fact, Apple has a side group called Apple Pride and Apple Cares that they gave us amazing consultants, T. Ray and Liz, who came on board. And just because I'm queer in the room does not mean that I am the one to shoulder all of the queerness upon me. In fact, I always defer to organizations such as GLAAD or Trevor or many other local institutes that people could begin to actually facilitate these true lived manifested lives and experiences and give them a realness and a wholeness to them. So being able to include non-binary writers, trans writers, Indigenous writers was a full spectrum and not just a half section where I had to give a little and then take a little or hide this with this character. No, we proudly say they, them pronouns. We proudly interject that into the world. We proudly interject the commonality of just seeing people living their lives in the background who may or may not be queer, but they're there. And that was a special point of creating something that meant so much to me.
Great. And Sam, what about you? Any specific stories, good or bad?
Oh, I did the same thing. I'm going to try and keep this very quick because I think this also kind of goes into the next question of, not to spoil, but our authentic stories and coming out. Because my coming out story is extremely intertwined with an episode of a show that I was working on at the time. It was when I was working on DuckTales. There was a character that everyone knew that I had really it was a little side character that I had really seen myself in and done a lot of work for, drawn fan art of her all the time. And when it came to her story in season 3, they're like, well, Sam, do you want to co-write, co-direct this episode? And I was like, yeah. And the only stipulation going into it was that the plan was for her to get together with Launchpad, who is a male character in the show. And I was like, okay, I mean, I've always seen her as gay, but I'll work with that. It's not my show, whatever. And so as we were working on it, I was also dealing with a lot of feelings, and it got to the point, we had finished the script, we were almost finishing the boards, and the only boards I had left to clean for my section was them kissing and then deciding that they were going to be a couple, and I couldn't bring myself to do it. And finally at 2 a.m. on one night that I couldn't sleep, I texted my co-director and I was like, Jason, I think that she's a lesbian and I have a plan. This is a C plot in this story. I think that I want to pitch changing this. And he was like, oh, hell yeah, sure, heck yeah, let's do it. So I go to the showrunner and the story editor and I say, this is something that's really important to me. We have a lot of straight couples in this show. We don't have any LGBT characters. And I really think that this is the more honest take on this story, is if we have a story about healthy rejection and friendship and that a woman doesn't always have to get with a guy just because, he likes her. And they were, at first it was kind of all right, well, this is a lot of changes, pretty late in the game. Are you sure you're down for it? And I'm like, yes. So they were extremely supportive in giving me time to go through and make those changes myself. They let me have, carte blanche on the script, except for the only thing was that we could not say the word lesbian. So it was they let me get in there in post and move things around to give us just the most subtle timing on her saying, I don't date men, and then as we were working on that episode, I came out as gay, and then eventually I came out as a lesbian. So it that experience and the support that I got will always be just such an important part of my personal story. And even though we weren't at a point to be able to use the word yet, I really feel that experience emboldened me to support other people to be yes, if you think this is the most honest take on this story, let's talk about it. Let's see if we can make this happen. So that's my experience.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a great story. And Rebecca, you kind of talked about it already when you shared your adventure from Steven Universe, actually to Steven Universe from Adventure Time. So I'm going to move on to you with the next topic. But I did want to say something quick that Taneka brought up, and that is the burden of being the queer person in the room and being expected to represent all queer points of view, which is just not possible. And I will say that it's very easy to reach out to the right people. You sometimes have to search a little extra. I'm writing a series of children's books. In the third book, a young girl reveals that she is trans to her friend. And I don't know that perspective at all. I can't authentically represent it, but GLAAD has an amazing consultant, and I reached out to a trans woman that I knew. I ran the manuscript by them, got lots of great notes, and then felt really comfortable. And my publisher felt comfortable too about how we handled it. So that's important. But along those lines, Rebecca, if you could speak to your experience, which you sort of did already, but as a queer person in the industry coming out, and how to be honest in this art form, framing your story for the creators who are in the audience watching us, who are looking to do the same.
Right. So I think it was, so after that initial sort of experience on Adventure Time, when I wanted to figure out how to sort of work things in so holistically to Steven Universe that they couldn't be taken out or easily censored. And over the next few years, what happened is that, very slowly the network became aware that I was of what I was doing, and they were seeing the response to it, even though they were saying, you can't do this with Ruby and Sapphire. These characters can't be in a romantic relationship. You can't talk about this online. People were picking up on it in a way that became impossible for them to ignore. And so at the time, I couldn't speak about it publicly, but I also, I think the other piece of that is that I couldn't speak about myself publicly, and people were starting to ask me point blank about my own sexual identity, and also just saying, why are you doing this? And I couldn't answer. And around, I think 2016, I was pulled into a meeting with my sort of bosses, like it went all the way up the chain. And I was just alone in this meeting, and they were telling me, we realize what you're doing, and we realize that if we tell you to stop, that is discrimination. Like they acknowledged that. But they said, if you continue to do this and you talk about it publicly, the show will probably be pulled from a lot of its international distribution, which at the time was funding the creation of the show. So they said, you can decide if you want to talk about this, but if you do, it will probably mean that the show will be over. And so I was sitting there in the room, and they said, what are you going to say? And I was trying to figure out on the fly, what I would say. And I said at the time, it's really important to me that this is reaching people in countries where this is illegal, where this is, it's dangerous in this country as well. But I didn't want the show to be pulled in these other places. So I spent some time sort of grappling with, do I never speak about this so that it can continue to reach people? Do I be honest about this? And then it means that, my being a cartoonist, making animated shows was my lifelong dream. So the idea that if I told the truth about myself, that I would lose that, and I would cost my entire team their jobs. I mean, that I just did not know what to do. And honestly, at the time, I became really physically sick. I wasn't eating. I was just in a really, really bad place. And so at Comic-Con in 2016, I was on the stage, and I was asked again by someone came up and said, what, we see that you're doing this. We love that you're doing this. Why are you including these LGBTQ stories in your show? And I gave another vague answer. These stories are great. These stories are human. People deserve these stories. Just keeping it away from me or myself. And then immediately after doing that, I just felt so hard. Like I couldn't do it anymore. I just could not stand dancing around it. And then 2 questions later, someone asked again, I think in an even more pointed way, just like, why are you doing this? And so I came out at San Diego as bi. And I feel like I almost blacked out. I don't even sort of know what happened after that. I was told afterwards that people like stood up. I couldn't look at anyone. I was looking at the ground, and then I went backstage and I just cried. And that was like a really. It took me years to even talk about what had happened. I did a podcast with Cameron Esposito where she was asking about it, and she had to stop tape because I couldn't talk about it without like going back to that place. Because part of it was that not only were fans in that room, all of my bosses were also in that room. And so that I didn't know if that was it, if that was just the end of all of it. And then the support was so great from fans, from audiences, from everyone. That I think it became difficult to end it because people were responding to it so positively. And I didn't know before that would be true. Especially as a bi person, I really didn't, I had seen a lot of people speculating that I was basically everything but bisexual. And I honestly believed that if I said it out loud, I would be letting everybody down. So that was really a shock to me. And so things really changed after that. And it feels a little goofy in hindsight to say like, oh, I came out at SDCC. But it was a really big turning point because it kind of just did it all at once. Everyone I worked with, everyone who was watching the show, because I had to be complete radio silence basically up until right that moment. So that was a big turning point. And it allowed people from GLAAD, Cort and Chris and other people who were interested in doing this work to finally speak to me about it, which it was unbelievable how different it was after I wasn't isolated anymore. Because finding other artists who were interested in doing this was also impossible. And I didn't want to put anyone in this situation because it was so painful to have to hear people say like, you can't do this over and over again. I wouldn't have wished it on anyone, but I think everyone here really knows that the flip side is that it's so worth it to be able to actually communicate through your work, like your actual self, you know.
And it's interesting that once somebody opens the door, and it's such a cliche, but then everybody runs through after them. And not to get too corny, but it made a big difference, Rebecca, and it changed the conversation in the industry significantly. But I'm going to move to Alonso and ask you, you mentioned there was a 3-year gap between you starting in the industry and then being out in the industry. So if you could share a little bit about that and how that's changed your ability to be honest in this art form.
Yeah, I mean, I at the time I was working on Gravity Falls, and I remember we were going in this season 2 road trip to Oregon to visit the woods and get inspired, and it was like this wonderful moment of bonding, and I got it in my mind. It's like, I want to come out. I want to tell my friends that I'm feeling this, right? And there were so many chances like, oh, maybe by the fire it could happen, or maybe we're like under the Paul Bunyan statue, or like we were like having a party, and it's just like it was all this like starts and stops, and I don't know, it was just I was in the middle of that moment. And, you know, it happened in the cafeteria one day. I was just like, and I was like, oh yeah, man, that's awesome. You know, they were wonderfully supportive, and then it just kind of like things started to make sense. You know, like it was more cohesive. Like my work and my presence, just starting as a very shy person in the industry and like having to pitch boards and put myself out there and like tell these stories, I was already pushing it. So I was just finding more of myself. And it was very tied with the creative process and the community I was building. And, you know, one of the writers was growing out his hair, and I was like, I love that. I was like, it was kind of like also representative. It started growing out my hair, and it was just like a way to just like, I was expressing myself differently. But, you know, Rebecca, your story is so inspiring, and it is really touching, because at that time, you know, you have all these ideas where you feel, am I going to be alone? Like, is this sort of like the price to pay, you know, to be authentic? And I'm so happy to know that that is not true, that the community was always there. I have these amazing friends and creators that are all around me. And I just want to say, like, just the fact that you're there and telling these stories, it's already a queer story, you know, like, it's like, it could be dinosaurs, it could be like, you know, the most like gore thing you can think of. It's a queer story because you are making it, right? That is at the base level, you know, but like we've grown so much from that. We continue to like be, as Taneka and Rebecca saying, like, just very purposeful in what we're saying, and I'm just, yeah, blown away, inspired by it.
Thank you. Because we're getting some great audience questions, and I want to make sure that I reserve some time for those, I'm going to move on to our fourth question and start out with Sam about connecting with queer colleagues and mentors in the industry, your experience in that, and any stories of support that you've received.
Yeah. So when I was on DuckTales, I was super lucky that around the same time that I was dealing with my own sexuality, one of my close friends and one of the directors on the show was also becoming, like, he had gotten to the point where he was becoming extremely out with his sexuality, and he and a couple of my other friends on the show who were also out, like, we kind of created a little community of, you know, anytime that we had any thoughts or concerns or just wanted to chat, you know, in general, like, we had made our own little, you know, all the three of us would go get coffee and just talk about how we were feeling, or, you know, if we needed support. And that was so inspiring to me. And I was like, I want to be that for other people. Like, I want to be a person who you can go to and, you know that, like, it's like, if you want to come in, close the door, talk about something that you're worried you can't talk about with someone else, like, you know, and it was such a blessing. On Molly, I had an entirely queer team, and that was, it felt like something I, like, early on, I would never have thought that I would have been able to have that, like, to work with, like, directly work with queer writers and not the whole team, but the people that I worked with personally, my board team and my revisionist, and you know, I got the opportunity to continue to tell them, like, I want you guys, like, the safety that you're saying that you're feeling now, like, I want us to continue this. And again, like, back to what Taneka was saying about being the only person in the room, like, nothing feels better than knowing that you have other people who have your back in a show. And like, this is not anything I have control over, but to see more, like, to be able to go into crews and know that you have, like, oh yeah, like, so-and-so on the writing team is bi, like, I know that she'll get it if I ask her about this, or, you know, this person on the art team is queer, like, we can talk about, like, oh, let's, you know, do this thing in an art direction, you know, and to know that you have a community within your show. And I think with everything becoming not easier, but more open, it's giving everyone courage and strength to go to each other. And that just makes a stronger community. And I love it. It's so great.
And I think you raise a good point there. And, you know, I'm no longer with Disney and didn't leave on great terms. But I will say that organization creates those communities on shows. And Rebecca, you created that community on your show, and Taneka and Alonso joined. Taneka, do you have any other stories about connecting with colleagues who are queer, or finding mentors, or any sort of great stories of support you've had?
Yeah. So my greatest pillar of support, other than Rebecca, even though I absolutely love that, was just the beginning. And it allowed me to join the Animation Guild. In the Animation Guild, I became a member of Queer Tag, Queer, the Animation Guild, which were also nicknamed Cuties. So from there, I was able to not only continue to bring in my brethren and meet all my other sisterhood, and all my thems and theys, I was able to also communicate that we were already there. We've been there since the beginning, and I got to see it in a much more larger and broader scope across studios and across certain shows. And not only did that begin to flourish, but then we began to communally begin to hang out and take up events and start having writers' nights and start doing lovely D&D functions. There's more to just the business. There's also the things that we're passionate about as people that connects us. May it be manga or anime or video games. There's many things that we can connect on a certain level, and it just draws us in. For me, that mentorship began to grow also while I was on a show called Craig of the Creek with Jeff Trammell. As Black individuals who were working at the Cartoon Network, it was really amazing to have somebody that I could sync with on that level and be able to tell queer stories, even through a show like Craig of the Creek, where we still existed and we could still push that point. So it was wonderful, not just to network with queer folks, but also everybody else who also exists. So it's like this constant umbrella. It just opens up, and then you're just kind of like looking up at all the wondrous people and kind of networks that you can then facilitate. And then you take it a step further with the GLAAD, or you take it even further with Queer Vox, which is now a platform that utilizes queer vocal talent that you can source out. So it's about taking those smaller things, pulling them into larger ecosystems, and then watching them proliferate without you having to keep constant watch of them, which is really nice. I just like to continue threading people together, making as many introductions as possible, making sure to check in with people and make sure the bandwidth is okay before doing it, and also just being respectful of people's boundaries as far as when they're working on a show, how much they can talk, how much they can't, and just making sure that you are just adhering to common principles of humanity while you're going about that situation. I love networking. I guess I'm a pretty good schmoozer, but there's also more to it than just schmoozing. It's also about making genuine connections, and that's where it really counts. And that's why this group is as cool and diverse as it is right now, thanks to you, Cort, because we've been able to foster those connections beyond just our studios.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned Queer Vox. I'm going to talk about it really briefly. And I think it even relates to the conversation about colleagues and mentors. JP Karliak, I take no credit for his success, but I did give him his earliest roles, and he just ran with it and is very successful in the industry, and then took that responsibility and that success and translated to founding this organization, Queer Vox, which is a place for queer voice actors to get training and to get help finding gigs and finding agents, but also advocates for them. And if you ever want to find queer voice talent, please check out Queer Vox. They will point you in the right direction. So we have some good audience questions, and I'm going to start out for the first one. It's actually very tactical, which is different than a lot of our open-ended questions. And I have a little bit of a thought here, but I'm particularly interested in you as panelists answering this question. Would you say that a positive message about LGBT identities comes across better if it's the main character protagonist that is queer, or does that give more space for backlash? And I would say that my perspective is, it does give more space for backlash, but I also think bold choices change the industry. But I also would answer that for shows for very young viewers, particularly when you're talking about characters like ponies for 5-year-olds, they don't necessarily have romantic or sexual lives that you can point to. So representation takes on different forms, not conforming to gender norms in terms of their behavior or their interests and their personality. And those characters, you can make lead characters. But I would love some perspective, and let's start with you, Rebecca.
Oh yeah, I think because of the experience I've had, whenever I see someone sort of measure someone's queer expression with terms like better, I start to get hives. Like, I really think that, the question is sort of like, is it better if this character is queer? The question is this character queer, right? You're coming from it from a creative point of view, as a writer, as a creator, this is not sort of a varnish you can put onto an existing thing. This, holistically, what is your art? That's what I would say. And if in your art your main character is queer, you have to do it, right? And if you take that out, that's awful, right? It's betraying what you have to say. But if you're sort of entering a project trying to measure, will it be better or worse? Will if this character has this identity, I think maybe take a step back and think about the story you're trying to tell and why you want to tell it, and then think, well, is this character, who is this character? What is this character's identity, in a very holistic way? I think that if it's coming from a genuine place, especially if it's coming from a place of reflecting your own queer experience or the queer experience of someone you love, then all of this falls away, and it's really just a matter of following your heart and your mind.
Yeah. Sam or Alonso, any perspective from you?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alonso.
No, please, Sam.
Oh, no. Well, just really quick, I wanted to piggyback off of what Rebecca was saying, because a lot of the times, it's like for me, I've never been a creator of a show. I've always worked as a voice on a show that has someone else being like, it's their story at the end of the day, And something that I've seen is like, if the showrunner or show editor wants to tell their authentic story, then that is also extremely valid, even if that's not your authentic story. So, for me, it's like, I think we need opportunities for LGBT people to be the creators and tell their stories, but at the same time, it's up to us to work with other people who have other goals, because like our stories are not the only stories that need to be told. So, if I'm working on a show where the story editor has something really specific to say about young straight couples that she thinks is missing, then that's important. And then we're lucky if then she's also, or not, how do I put this? But then she also is giving space for people to say like, but we have these other characters who aren't the character that I am focusing on, if you would like to bring a story there. And then it's about working together to create a great gamut of authentic stories within a show. And then let's get, more LGBT people in the positions to tell those main character stories.
Alonso?
Absolutely. No, that's great. No, and I think about, the idea of seeing yourself reflected on the screen, which is so important. And I feel like for queer people, sometimes you didn't even know you were missing it because it was so absent that when it comes, you're like, oh my gosh, I was needing this all my life, and I'm suddenly giddy. and I was just like realizing how absent it was. So it is really refreshing. And it's not only, and I see it like, it's not only seeing yourself, but you also understand the world around you. You see like, this might not be me, but this is my friend, this is my partner, this is my cousin, this is like, I'm seeing aspects of the world around me and I can understand it. So I think that's also a wonderful thing about representation. It's just about that presence, like having, just from being completely absent to just like having many stories and having room for what that story authentically is. If it's a comedy and a simple story, or is it a story about grief, like let's go deep and explore it, whatever that is, like Rebecca said, and Sam, telling the story authentically is what is gonna drive it, yeah.
And I agree with all of those beautiful words. I will also take a step back and observe that I know some queer creators who have really strong pitches for kid shows with a queer lead and have been unable to sell them in. And so we can't compromise our vision. At the same time, the industry still has some work to do. And I think somebody will break that barrier with a strong lead, and then we'll see some change. But in the meantime, it is challenging. And so, while without compromising your vision, I think take other opportunities or shows that you're on to seed more of this content to help open that door for that person. The next question is a really sensitive and difficult one. And I'm going to throw it to Taneka first, because it's sort of the flip of the question that we were just discussing. And that is, do you think that a heterosexual creator can write a believable, authentic queer character that delivers realistically on the experience of being gay, bi, etc.?
Well, how open-minded are they to working with people who are queer, bi, gay, and etc. is kind of like the actual answer to that. Because no, you haven't lived it authentically, but are you actually reaching out to the community? Are you actually seeking out the resources? Do you actually know the history of Stonewall before mentioning it? There are many purposes that come from just having that moment and being able to clearly say, I don't actually have this knowledge. I need to go gain this knowledge. And therefore then opening the floor to not just credit hogging, if you will. I don't believe in needing that, which is why I push out as many artists as possible, because I'm not the only voice in the room. And I don't want to be the only voice in the room, because that makes me alone. But for someone who's tackling this and might feel a little afraid. I mean, I felt afraid when I was writing my first white character. Was I getting it right? Is the hair flips there? Is the as ifs there? But that's just me embellishing. That's also me pulling a stereotype. That's also me minimizing that character in almost a way. So was that proper? No. So instead, I have my wife of 13 years that I can mine from. But that doesn't mean that you always marry the person that you use as a research subject. So don't do that. Just come at it authentically and think about it from the perspective of who is the audience this story is for, all right? Are you trying to make other people aware of this journey and process? Or are you merely just looking to gain some sort of superficial plot hanger cliff that nobody really needed to be on? That becomes a problem, not for the audience to therefore break. It becomes on the onus of the writer. And as a writer myself, I would also not just think of a Wikipedia article as being done with research. Remember to actually get out there in your community, get out there and find the people and the voices who have been doing this for a while. Give them the same platform as yourself. And I promise you, your project is going to be a heck of a lot better for it.
Yes.
Oh, could I jump in?
Your Cort, you're muted.
My turn. Rebecca, please go ahead. I see your hand raised.
Oh yeah. For this is I've fielded a lot of questions like this, and I feel really strongly about it, which is that I think, just like us, a person is someone's sexual identity is a part of their experience and a part of their art. And I think that the question isn't so much if someone is a heterosexual creator, can they write a queer character? The question is, are you an ally? Because I think if you make a piece of art that's, if your goal is to realistically depict the bi or gay experience, it comes down to like, why do you want to do that? And if you want to do that because you want to sort of get it right, or because you see that this is the way the industry is going, I think that will become very difficult, because that doesn't actually give you the tools to be interested or sensitive in this experience. But and I've also seen creators struggle, and I think they don't need to, making something where they turn around and say, I feel very insecure because I'm actually making something that's not about me. How do I do this? I'm making something about a kind of character that I can't fully embody. And I always say that, I say, you're making art that reflects you as an ally. And if you are living that, if you are interested in these communities, and if you are interested in helping and participating in these spaces as an ally, the work will flow out very easily. The desire to work with people who understand this experience will be very natural, because that's how you feel. So I would say the question is not so much if you're a heterosexual creator, but if you are an ally who's genuinely interested in that experience.
Yes.
I think it is somewhat dependent on, is the primary POV of the series from a queer perspective, then I would discourage you, because I think that authentic voice is not going to come across. But if you're trying to represent the world that we live in, and that's also true of ethnic diversity, and not to keep going back to my children's books, but because it's set in the Himalayas, some characters are Western, some characters are Eastern, but some of them are South Asian. I made a deal with the publisher that we had to bring in a South Asian illustrator, preferably from India. And to your point, and it's actually similar, Taneka, to what you said, that person not only offered that perspective, but made the content that much better from her contribution. And I think those are the kinds of things, if you're going to engage in queer characters, to engage with queer creators and make them partners more than, you talked about credit hogging, like real partnership. Our next question, and this is open to anybody on the panel, and please raise your hand. As writers, actually, we sort of answered this one. Question 2, from Anita Ozarek, I hope I said that correct, from Kaboom Animation Festival. She asks, what are the changes that we have to introduce in the case of this new generation for which diversity of voices and queerness is so much more natural than in the previous generation? So I think the question there is, as the audience has changed and as the new breed of creators has changed, what are the changes that we see happening in terms of the way we work? I've been making animation for 2 decades. And my story is pretty unique because I started on Barbie working with a lot of queer people who worked on Barbie. So I've been out from day one. But for people who haven't, what is that like? And I will say that I've worked with old school animators from the 90s, and my queer perspective is something I really struggled to get them to understand. But does anybody else have any perspective on the changes in terms of creators and voices and audience? Rebecca?
Yeah, I think this is something I think has come up a lot, especially I've had teams with really broad range of ages and experiences. One thing, sort of going back to the question of community, one thing I've been really grateful for is that I've become a board member for the Trevor Project, which is an LGBTQIA+ suicide hotline, and I've become really involved in mental health spaces. And from being part of those particular spaces, I think, like I mentioned before about better, the idea that somebody's queerness is more natural or more free, or, you know, I would hate to think that the previous generation is experiencing a less natural version of queerness because they weren't able to be open. I think that everybody's experience, the key to me is that everyone's experience is valid, and their way of expressing it is also valid at whatever stage they are. You know, I couldn't stand to think that the work that I was doing when I was closeted, that has less worth than the work that I was doing after. And so I would say that the key is always to support whomever that artist is, wherever they're at, to tell as specific a story as hopefully they can, or as personal a story as they can be able to, and to do as much as one can to pave the way for that, you know, at whatever stage they're at and at whatever stage the world's at. And that all of it is fabulous, all of it is fantastic, and bless everything that's able to emerge at any stage.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to that, like it just takes time to develop your voice, your creative voice. And it is a process of the coming out, the being comfortable, and then just like expressing it and then advocating for your community at whatever stage that you have to live that experience, enjoy that experience, and you know, like make the most of it, right? Like I think, and there's value for that. So if you as an artist are, and I speak for myself, like, you know, you're finding your way, you're finding like what is gonna be that for me. I know there's artists ready to go, and there's stories that need to be told like yesterday, right? So let's tell the stories now, and then like support them, like make them happen, So because we're opening doors, we're actually kicking them and kicking them open, and you know, and that is sort of like, it opens people's minds. I think it's just like that we need to when people's perspectives open up, that is the sort of the field to continue to grow these wonderful stories. Yeah. I am just so inspired hearing all these perspectives. This is really stunning.
Sam or Taneka, any more on that? Oh, Rebecca, you want to go again? Go ahead.
I'll just be really quick. I'm sorry, because I already answered. But I think within animation, there's also a really interesting phenomenon, I think, from my particular generation, which is that we grew up with these sort of twisted, queer-coded villains. And that was something that I think resonated with a lot of us. And I've definitely seen a lot of discussion about, you know, and participated in it, where it's like, hey, this was bad. Maybe, you know, these kind of mannerisms only being associated with horrible monsters who deserve to die. Maybe that was like not a net win for us. But like, I can't take out the sort of the way that resonated with me. And so I think that's another example. It's like, I love the thought that people will grow up without that being the only thing that they feel a connection to. But I also have a sort of deep affection for those of us that's grapple with this love for kind of the twisted animated monster that we connected with. So yeah, I think there's room for all of it. And I think I love to think of that as being sort of a beautiful and unique, albeit complicated moment in time.
Queer villains exist. That's all I want to say. Just as much as we're heroes, just as much as we're everything else within a series, incidentals, backgrounds, they should be at all levels just to make the world fair. Also, I'm just going to say, if your supervillain is like God levels and they're like non-binary, because you can't really just like mute that out to a gender binary. Just saying, that's just me and my feelings, but I found other people who feel that way and have allowed me to put it into TV shows. So I'm going to keep doing that because it's more interesting. It's fun. It's a different dynamic and a different approach to a concept that I feel has been told a bunch of times before me, and really well, by people I've worked with, like Greg Weisman. So you just have to come at it with your own approach and come with it with your own authenticity, but also remember all the other actual authenticity that's around you 24/7 that you can seriously bring in, collaborate with, and make something really cohesive that jams.
That's beautiful. I'm going to have one last thought from Sam for the audience, and then we're going to let you go. Sam, any last part? I know that's a hard one to follow.
No, Taneka like hit it on the head, because I actually want to quote something that Alonso said way back when we did that LGBTQ panel at Cal Arts together, like however many, 6-7 years ago. We just like, gay LGBT people have the same breadth of stories as straight people, and we just want to we want all of that to be out there, not one kind of queer story. And I think what Alonso said is, if straight people can have so many bad sitcoms about living together, why can't we? So it's like, let us have that breadth of stories for all LGBT people.
That is a gorgeous way for us to end. I want to thank you, our audience, at Animafest. I know it's the evening, so hopefully you're going to go out on the town and maybe think about all the things that we talked about. We really appreciate you listening to us. I appreciate the wonderful questions. I wish we could have answered more, but I think it's time for us to wrap up. And I want to thank all of our panelists, Rebecca, Taneka, Alonso, Sam. Thank you so much for the great conversation. We'd be happy to do this again. Take care, all of you, and make great cartoons.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.